My Borrowed Son. Chapter 27. Strangers Like Me. Parker was in awe of the place he saw. This place was so strange, and yet he knew it was a house. An aroma that smelled sweet and familiar lingered in the air, and only got stronger as the four of them approached the structure. Parker's mind was completely numb. No part of him felt real. He felt like a helium balloon, floating along and merely existing. Every sense was taking in information, but processing it was another story. As they approached, Parker noticed two other small children who were smaller and younger than him outside of the structure. It sounded like the two of them were talking. Well, one was talking, and the other was babbling simple phrases. It wasn't until they were a few feet away that they instinctively stopped and turned toward the approaching group. The oldest of the two's eyes were wide, and he quickly took the younger by the hand and guided her inside. There was some kind of commotion inside, and a few seconds later, two more adults, one man and one woman, who looked a little younger than the man, walked outside of the structure. Their expressions told Parker everything he needed to know about seeing him with the others. They were apprehensive, completely uneasy, and shocked into silence at seeing him. Parker's step faltered, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He never considered himself a shy person, but too much had happened all at once and was making him retreat into himself. His body trembled as he pulled the cloak given to him by the man further over his shoulders. This made the man stop and glance over at Parker. "You're all right. It's going to be okay, kid," said the man. The same instinct Parker had experienced all his life that raised when he sensed his mom coming, or when he fell from a great distance, wasn't giving him any red flags. Usually, the hair would raise on the back of his neck, or something inside him would be screaming to run away. This was not the case here. In fact, there was something homey about what was happening. It was familiar. Parker swallowed, his throat feeling like sandpaper from getting sick earlier, and followed behind the man. The woman ushered the other two teens into the home, giving Kit a harsh stare before her features softened as she looked back to Parker. The man did the same thing as Finnick and Kit passed, saying something along the lines of, "We'll talk about this later," as Kit crossed the threshold. The woman exhaled slowly, as though to calm herself down before stepping forward toward Parker. The young teen noticed she had a prosthetic leg, which seemed unfathomable. How could she have a prosthetic leg and not be human? How did she get the supplies for it? It looked 3D printed after all.
"Parker, sweetie, come on inside. I'm sure you have some questions,"
said the woman as she turned on her heel and vanished inside the house. The man with her followed shortly behind after giving the man who helped Parker a stern look. Parker wasn't sure why, but he got the impression that there was something uneasy and unspoken between the group and the stranger. Regardless, Parker drifted along through the door and into the home. He immediately noticed so many odds and ends that were hung from the walls. The items ranged from ones he actually used to help build his own space, to creative alternatives for everyday items. Things like thumbtacks in the walls for coats and bags, and twist ties for hinges on the doors. There was a cork in the corner, with a paperclip in the back, which made the thing look like a stool or chair, and this was just the hallway. The number of things in the kitchen and living area alone looked like they had been fashioned out of the most obscure items and turned out okay. One of the things Parker noticed was a bundle of blankets in the corner that looked like it had been made from yarn. There were trinkets hanging in the air, and cut paper dolls and origami creations that looked to be made from old gum wrappers. The idea of using trash to decorate was an odd one to Parker, but the actual execution looked rather enchanting and homey. This was just one of so many things all around that he recognized for their actual use, but appreciated its reused purpose.
What on earth is happening? This place is fascinating. They reuse everyday items to make new things, and use them for something else entirely. That matchbox is the cabinet and drawers. This other one is a sofa.
Parker absent-mindedly stepped into the kitchen and suddenly found himself sitting at the kitchen table with a thimble full of something that smelled like tea in front of him. The man, who was in the house, was sitting at the head of the table, made of cards, while the woman continued to bustle about the kitchen, snagging more cups of tea for everyone else. Finnick, the older teen, sat next to his father at a diagonal from Parker, while the girl, Kit, leaned against the door facing with her arms crossed as tightly as a twisty pretzel. The other two were in the living area. It was clear the older one was meant to watch over the youngest, but was failing miserably because every few seconds the youngest managed to charge into the kitchen in pursuit of her mother. The other man stayed leaned up against the kitchen counter as the woman sat down across from Parker. With her lack of movement, everything finally fell still in the house. The tension was tangible, but Parker had no idea how to even begin. What did he ask? Did he have the right to leave? Was he being kept here? Were all of these people delusional and calling themselves borrowers? Or was that actually what they were? Was that what he was?
Well, Parker, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. You can take your time if you'd like. We're happy to answer anything,
said the woman.
I suppose introductions are in order. I'm Mira, and this is my husband, Toulouse. Our eldest is Finnick, and our daughter, whom I've been told you met last night, is Sprocket. Our other son is Reed, and our youngest is Dove. We've been living here for many years, and, well, hearing about your arrival certainly sparked some discussion.
Parker looked at the man in the corner. He pulled the cloak further over his shoulders and swallowed again. The smell of the tea was appealing, but Parker's insides felt like they could turn for the worst at any moment.
And him?
The man glanced up at Parker, keeping his arms folded loosely, before sighing heftily. Curse. I moved here with you and your mom. Parker recited the names a few times in his mind, but he knew they wouldn't stick. He felt like his mind was frozen in time back when he first entered the walls, and it would take nothing short of an ice chisel to get information through his brain at the moment.
Right. Parker, you said you've known me for a while. But what does that mean?
Parker asked, interrupting Finnick as he began speaking. Parker wanted desperately for them to stay quiet and let him process the information in front of him. But that was a pipe dream at this point. It was obvious they wanted to help and wouldn't relent until they thought he was satisfied with their answers. They looked over at Kurz, as did Parker, and waited for the answer. said it before. I was hidden. I found your home a little over 4 years ago and decided to live there and to make sure you were okay," said Kurz. He sounded exhausted, but truthful. But it still didn't make sense to Parker.
What? What does that even mean? Okay, from what?
Parker heard Kit scoff before she piped up from her spot in the doorway.
Oh, please,
She said exasperatedly.
okay, from the human. He was making sure you were safe from the human.
"Sprocket!" scolded Toulouse firmly, making Parker jump slightly. Kit rolled her eyes and rolled her lips together to form a thin line on her face. The father sighed and nodded. "She means the woman you call Mom."
The woman I call Mom?
Those words echoed hollowly in Parker's mind. It made him bristle that these people were calling his mom the woman, reducing everything she did for him all his life to 2 simple words that didn't do her justice. It also felt like a punch in the gut. The woman he knew as his mom wasn't actually that thing. A mom was a woman who gave birth to you. A mom wouldn't lie to you. A mom helped and protected as well as provided for you. A mom loved you. Parker felt his inside swirl again, and he coughed a little as his body lurched. Thankfully, nothing came up, but it did make Parker feel sicker by the second.
But... Parker, it's okay. I'm sorry. We're just not used to talking to a borrower who has been seen and talked to a human before. Old habits die hard, apologized Mira, as she leaned forward onto the table and smiled while catching Parker's eye.
That word is what helped snap Parker out of his stupor. Now feeling completely detached, the questions started coming in clearer for Parker. Though still numb and waiting for something to break through his frozen mind, Parker's questions started manifesting, and he wasn't about to let them slip away.
That word, borrower, what is it?
Asked Parker. Sympathetic glances flashed from every set of eyes to one another before turning back to Parker. Mira looked visibly shaken and upset, but she still mustered a smile for the young teen.
Well, that's what we are. We're borrowers. We borrow things that humans won't miss in order to survive. Little things like sugar, bread, pens, cloth, ribbons, and anything else we might find useful, Mira replied.
We usually don't see other borrowers often, but we all live by a code in order to keep ourselves safe, Finnick chimed in as he too leaned forward in his chair. It's rare for so many borrowers to be living together under the same roof, since it's more likely a human will notice things going missing.
What about those two who come to visit?
Interjected Reed as he began dragging the youngest, Dove, back to the living room.
They said they come from a massive group.
Ray and Hero probably live in that abandoned house down by the creek. I can't imagine they'll live in a human's house, especially with a big group. You saw their clothes. Definitely outies. Dismissed Finnick.
Outies?
Echoed Parker. Toulouse nodded. Yes, borrowers are usually innies or outies, meaning where they live, either inside a house or outside in the wilds, replied the father of four. Parker had to physically rest his head on the table to keep from vomiting again. The entire room was spinning faster and faster, making the teen see stars, and his action quieted them for a minute while he regained his bearings. When he did, he dared to take a sip of the tea Mira gave him just to quench his parched throat. It was soothing and made him feel a little less sick. The sweetness definitely helped add to the taste, too.
So, you were saying they're just massive groups? Or rather, small clusters of groups of Parker
couldn't get the word out, but his meaning was understood.
Yes, that's correct,
replied Toulouse.
Then why haven't I heard of you? Why isn't it on the internet? Why? How does no one know about you?
Asked Parker.
About us, you mean?
Grumbled Kid. Mira snapped her fingers harshly at her daughter and gave her a warning stare before turning back to Parker. The palpable tension dissipated after a few moments in intense silence, followed by the eldest son clearing his throat.
Because of the rules,
Finnick replied. Parker's blank expression prompted further explanation. This threw Parker for a loop.
Rules? There are rules?
Parker asked aloud unintentionally.
Yes, quite a few of them. There are 3 we borrowers generally abide by in order to keep ourselves safe.
The way Toulouse explained reminded Parker of how his mom would explain things to him. It was slow and simple, broken into multiple parts to make it easier for him to process the information.
The first rule is to never be seen by a human, because it is dangerous for you and for all of borrower kind. The second rule flows into the first, which is you must move if you think you've been seen. It's for your protection, even if you weren't seen. The last rule is to never talk to humans. If they know we are sentient, they'll only try and get answers out of us.
Parker listened to the father's explanation, and something in his mind flashed. It was quick, like a light bulb memory. But he remembered hearing those rules once before, along with the reason why. Slowly, Parker said, "Because they'll treat you like a pet." The inquisitive glances the family members gave one another told Parker he had said something correctly.
That's right,
said Reed as he popped back into the kitchen to retrieve Dove once again.
You'll get thrown in the cage and they'll throw away the key. You'll never be seen or heard from again, and that'll be the exposure of borrower kind.
Parker twisted around in the chair and glanced at the younger kid as he flashed a smile and, snagging his little sister under the armpits, hoisted her up and waddled back to the living room. Parker's vision blackened around the edges, and he once again needed to rest his head on the table. A cold sweat covered his body. Regret filled him as he realized he was probably soaking Kurz's cloak through with his perspiration. The family of borrowers waited patiently for Parker's recovery as they awaited his next question. But his mind was running wild. Everything and nothing made sense. This had to be a dream, right? Parker pinched himself under the table hard along the outside of his thigh, but the trick didn't work, and he was met with 5 pairs of eyes staring at him expectantly. One thought was something he clung to, however, and he hoped in this moment to possibly disprove everything they just said.
But my mom, she said it was a genetic condition. She said I have Parve homunculi syndrome. It's just a rare condition. Are you sure you don't just have that?
Mira must have heard the desperation in Parker's voice because her features filled once again sympathetically.
I know how weird it must sound,
said Mira. She brushed her hair to the side and sighed, before clasping her hands together and resting them on the table.
but we're borrowers. We're different than humans for a number of different reasons, despite how similar we might look.
Differences?
Parker barely uttered the word, fearing the sip of tea he had just had was going to churn his insides and reappear.
Yeah, differences. We have instincts that humans don't have. Our vision is better in the dark. We have great balance and land on our feet. Well, most of the time.
Finnick stated.
Tell us, Parker. Have you ever experienced anything like that? Sensing something before it happened? Feeling the tremors in the ground as a human walks around when their room's away? Finding curious places to hide? Or feeling the need to hide when you sense something coming? Asked Toulouse. Haven't you ever fallen from up high and landed safely on the ground? The instinct or need to reuse or create? What about walking around here in the walls? Didn't you notice how well you could see in such low light?
His scenarios made Parker's blood run cold. Every single one of those things he mentioned was something Parker had experienced. He had always attributed those things to his condition.
So, my condition, it's a lie. Well, not a lie. I do have a condition. I'm a borrower. Everything they're saying makes sense. How would they know about everything if they hadn't experienced it themselves? They don't know about my climbing and falling habits. They don't know about the things I've invented. They couldn't have known about my senses unless they had it too.
Mira's face softened as she quickly pushed herself to her feet and retrieved a single square of toilet paper, tearing off a side and gently pushing it over toward Parker. It was only now he realized warm, salty tears were soaking his face. The tears glided down his cheeks and puddled at his chin before dripping onto his shirt. His entire body shook like a leaf in a windstorm as he numbly snagged the piece of toilet paper and hid his face away. Breathing was a chore, and a few breaths he sucked in racked his body with sobs. Over and over, he asked himself why. Why him? Why was this happening? How many borrowers were out there? Surely there had to be some reference to them specifically out there in the world. How could an entire race of people just be completely unnoticed like this family? The thoughts that followed only made Parker's sobs double him over. How long had his mom known about him and not said anything? Why was he just finding all of this out now? Why had his mom lied to him? Didn't she love him? Why didn't she just tell him the truth? Parker wasn't sure how long he stayed hunched over, smashing the now soggy piece of toilet paper to his face. But he did suddenly notice a pressure on his hand that wasn't there before. Not like he cared. Everything was spiraling out of control and off of the edge of a cliff. What was one more thing? Eyes red and dry despite the moist tears, Parker blinked away the blur and finally realized the pressure on his hand was Mira. She had reached forward and gently clasped his hand in her own. Parker felt the urge to resist, but couldn't tear himself away from the comfort the pressure of her hand gave. Her motherly instincts were right. All Parker wanted right now was a hug. But from whom? His mom? Someone his own size? Even now, the thought of someone being able to wrap their arms around him, and him being able to do the same, was unfathomable. As his breathing calmed, Parker felt a new emotion boiling in his belly, and it quickly consumed him. Anger. Frustrated anger and distrust filled him like magma filling a volcano. He felt ready to burst at any moment, but he wasn't about to leave now. He needed to know more about these strangers like him. He needed to know more. His desire for knowledge, fueled by the fact he had been deceived for his entire life, hardened his features and cleared the darkness away from the corners of his eyes.
Parker, I know this is a lot for you all at once, said Mira, noticing the teen's change in demeanor. But,
Please,
said Parker, his voice cracking. The teenager was barely able to keep from falling apart as he sat there on the cork bottle chair.
just tell me what you can about borrowers, about what happens when borrowers are seen, what happens, and about me and my...
Parker's voice trailed off as he suddenly had trouble saying the word mom. Toulouse sighed and leaned heavily onto the table and said,
Parker, are you sure?
Parker nodded and squeezed Mira's hand.
Yes,
he said definitively.
please.
It took a few hours, but Toulouse and his family began telling Parker what he needed to know. They told him about how borrowers had managed to keep themselves secret because of the rules, and how they've had narrow misses in the past. They talked about how they went about creating their home, and the balance borrowers needed to live in secret with their human counterparts. What really made Parker's blood boil was the stories about what happened to borrowers in the stories where they were caught. Some were thrown in cages until they were rescued. Others managed to trick their ways out of their containment and away from their human captors. The one that hurt Parker the most was the ones that were treated as evolved pets. Evolved pets had little homes they lived in with electricity and water. Repurposed doll houses were usually the container, used rather than a cage with traditional bars, just like what Parker lived in. Borrowers experienced isolation, and every little thing was always taken care of. No need to borrow because food was always on the table. No need to climb because you're carried everywhere. No need to go outside because entertainment is brought to you. The purpose of a borrower was to go out and survive, not be taken care of at the whim of a human. It was the exact existence Parker had been living. It made his insides churn to think that his mom had been treating him like a pet for practically all of his life.
All right, that's enough for today,
said Kurz, chiming in after hours of silence. He had remained practically emotionless and silent for most of the time while Toulouse and his family helped educate Parker in the ways of a borrower. The family opened their mouths to object, but Kurz beat them to it.
Parker has been gone for a while, and I'm sure his mom is worried sick about him being missing. She's bound to have noticed by now. You don't want her looking for him, do you?
The question shut down any arguments the family might have had. Despite Parker's reservation in returning, he sighed and pushed himself to his feet.
Thank you. Really,
Parker stammered over his words as he thought about everything he just learned. You don't need to thank us, Parker. Just keep yourself safe.
said Mira.
And if you don't mind, keep your knowledge about this place and my family close to your chest. I apologize again on behalf of my daughter. We should have made it clearer that she wasn't supposed to act rashly when it came to your situation, said Toulouse.
Thanks. I can probably do that,
said Parker. His head swirled dangerously fast with his first step, but thankfully Kurz was by his side and guided Parker safely toward the door. The older borrower watched the younger cautiously, while Parker paid him no mind. Parker's mind was far from him. There were too many other things going on to be concerned about revealing the family's home. With a final farewell, Parker and Kurz left the house and headed back down the route they came. The two borrowers were completely silent for the majority of the trek, leaving Parker to fester and dwell in his own thoughts. It wasn't until they were by the wall at a familiar stretch that Kurz physically stopped moving forward and turned to face Parker. There was something in his expression that was sorrowful and uneasy, but also determined. It reminded Parker of the look Toulouse gave him a few times. Fatherly. It was a new look, and it took the teen by surprise.
Parker, I know this is not how any of us wanted things to go, said Kurz. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. It was never my intention to help keep this truth from you. I had actually planned on talking to your mom today to figure out how to talk to you.
Parker wasn't sure if he was buying it, but Kurz continued.
I know you're going through a lot, and I know I have no right to ask this of you, but listen to me, and don't do anything rash, said Kurz.
Parker bristled at the words.
Rash? You don't want me to be rash? You knew! You watched for years and let me believe.
Parker took a breath as his fury reared its head again.
You let me believe I was human. You and that woman both.
Kurz stiffened as he heard that word. The last thing he wanted to do was make an enemy out of Parker, but Kurz needed to make a few things clear to Parker. Attempting to defuse the situation, he kept his voice calm and low.
Parker, that woman is still your mom. She loves you and only wants the best for you. Believe me, I've seen it every day for years. I don't think she would intentionally hurt you. I don't know why she didn't say anything, but it can't have been easy when your differences are so obvious, said Kurz firmly.
Parker jerked his head away as he looked down at the corner of a nearby beam.
She lied.
I know. And that's not the best look. Still, Parker, trust me on this. She loves you. Regardless of everything else, she loves you, emphasized Kurz.
She treated me like a... How could I trust someone who would lie to me so easily for so long?
Words spilled out of Parker like water from a leaking sponge. He felt like he couldn't absorb another thing, and his words were now just spilling out.
No, she didn't. She treated you like her son. Coming from a family who used to have pets, I can see where taking care of a kid and taking care of a pet are almost the same thing, pointed at Kurz.
But...
Listen, Parker, don't do anything rash. Think about everything you've just learned, and don't act emotionally. That'll only hurt more, advised Kurz. Sit and think about everything. I'll be back later tonight to check on you if you'd like. Parker nodded numbly, but the adult's words simply added to the puddle that was his thoughts. Kurz finished walking Parker to his room and, with a reassuring pat on his shoulder, left the teen to go back to the world he knew. As Parker jumped back through the electrical cover and climbed the stairs to his little house, he suddenly realized he was still wearing Kurz's cloak. The heavy fabric had been draped over his shoulders the entire walk back, and Kurz must have thought Parker needed it more. It felt like a hug from behind, and the warmth of the fabric kept Parker's shaking at bay. The teen made it back to his room and into his space, with every intention of resting in his bed until dinner. The words he wanted to say were locked somewhere in his brain. He just needed time to muddle through. It was what he saw in his kitchen as he entered the little house that instantly changed his mind. Parker noticed a massive plate with cut apples just sitting there. Before, this would have been an enjoyable treat. Now, however, all Parker saw was those videos on his social media where some tasty treat was delivered on a platter to none other than the family pet. Something about seeing that plate snapped something in his mind. You're just a pet to her. It was a bold, hateful thought that spawned out of nowhere in his mind, fueled only by recent events. Despite Kurz's warning, he wanted to know the answers. He wanted to know why his mom hadn't told him anything and everything she knew about him. Another greater part of him hoped that everything he'd just heard was a lie. He wanted it to be untrue. He wanted Kurz and Toulouse and Mira and Finnick and Reed and Kit all to be lying to his face to abduct him into the walls. Parker spun on his heel and marched back down the stairs and dared to climb the steps all the way down to the kitchen, where he heard his mom, that woman, working away. Trembling in his shoes, Parker finally made it to the ground level and came around the corner. The urge to vomit as he saw her filled him, which contrasted greatly with the expression on her face when she saw him. Amanda had been pacing the floor for what felt like hours. She had practically torn the house upside down trying to find her son, Parker. After their little disagreement this morning, and the fear eating her alive, she couldn't find him. His room, not there. Living area, not there. Bathroom, nowhere to be seen. Kitchen, nope. She had cut up some apples in the hopes of luring him out to make sure he had a little something to eat if he was still upset with her, but to no avail. She hoped that he hadn't done something foolish or decided to go into the walls and got hurt. It was an idea she should have supported, but was afraid to. It was clear now, more than ever, that she needed to talk to Parker about everything. And now, she finally had the words to do so. The moment she found him, she would tell him everything. It was long overdue, but it was time. If only she could find him. Now, after she was about to start calling and shouting, there he was. Parker came out from around the corner and relief immediately flooded over her. She rushed over and knelt, which made Parker flinch and shy away. Struck by the odd interaction, Amanda glanced over him and immediately noticed his appearance. Parker looked drained. He had obviously been crying and looked ill. What really caught her off guard was what he had draped over his shoulders. It looked like some kind of cloak, but it was way too big for him. Brown, frayed, and torn,
This thing obviously didn't come from anything either of them had made. There was time to ask questions later. Right now, she was relieved beyond words that Parker was here.
Parker, I'm so glad you're here. I was worried sick. Where were you? Are you okay? Sweetie, I'm so sorry about earlier. I don't know what came over me. You should have what?
Interrupted Parker. Something that wasn't like him. Amanda, caught off guard, felt her heart clench as she met her son's eyes. There was something in them that she registered immediately. Hurt, pain, anger, frustration, desperation. Before she could say anything, Parker continued.
How long?
Those two words shook Amanda to her bones.
No. What? How long? How long what?
How long have you known I'm not your son? The words hung in the air. Like a dense fog, Amanda suddenly felt lost. Tendrils of tension clutched her chest.
No. I've run out of time. I'm too late.
Amanda's throat clenched. She knew this conversation was going to happen, but not like this. She looked into Parker's soft brown eyes and saw he was clinging onto the last threads of hope. It was part of that desperation she saw earlier. And she had no lifeline to give him.
Well?
Parker's voice cracked as tears welled up in his eyes. He looked to be on the verge of collapse. Amanda bit back her own emotions as they constricted her throat. A bottomless void opened in Amanda's heart.
Parker, you are my son. I've always been your mom,
said Amanda. Parker couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was she serious, or was she lying? The tether he thought he was receiving was just within grasp. Maybe this was all just a bad dream. Her next words shattered him.
But I'm not your only mom. Some beautiful, wonderful woman gave birth to you.
Amanda's cheeks were etched with tears at this point. With the last bit of her strength, she choked out,
I love you, Parker, as if you came from me. But you're right. You are not mine.